Hey, do you want to learn how to quickly analyze a mobile home park or a multifamily deal so that you can make a good decision in whether you should buy it or pass it? In this video, I'm going to break down what's important to look at from a broker's pro forma, what there should be included, what you should keep an eye out for so that you can make a decision as to whether you should buy the deal or pass the deal. Hey everyone, my name's Tyson. I'm a commercial real estate investor and a commercial real estate broker. And in this video, we're going to break down exactly what you should look for so that you can identify a good deal from a bad deal. So let's get started. So the first thing that we want to look at is obviously income. What is the property bringing in? And people like to talk about, how much income a property made. They're typically referring to gross income or revenue, usually the same thing. And so what we want to look at is we're going to take the rent roll. And a rent roll is, in its simplest form, it's a list of all the units that either the multifamily or the mobile home park has and the rent that they're paying. So for example, you would have unit 1 paying $500 a month, unit 2 paying $450 a month, and so on. So if you have a 15 space multifamily or mobile home park, you would get a list of all those tenants and their specific rents that they're paying. And that's what's called a rent roll. And so with the rent roll, what we want to do is we want to project it 12 months forward, right? So annualize it. So realistically, we'd want to know what we're going to collect for gross income for that first year. That will give us a gross operating income number that we can project forward and say, when we buy this, we're expecting that this is going to be the income that we inherit. Next, you're going to have any ancillary sources of income. So any income that maybe is additional to the rent. So in some cases, you may have storage income, you may have parking, you might have utility reimbursements, you could have late fees. There's a number of different fees or income sources that you would have in addition to your rent. What we're gonna do is we're gonna add that all below the gross income, and that would be considered additional income. So once we have those two, so far we've got the gross operating income, we've got the additional income. For the sake of this, we'll call it gross income. And then we're gonna apply a vacancy factor. Now, some people wanna get away with not adding a vacancy factor, especially in mobile home parks. And the reality is you have very few vacancies. If somebody sells their home, they're typically not gonna have a lapse in rent. But the reality is all lenders will look at vacancy as something that's included in their underwriting. So it's a mitigating risk factor. So for this instance, we're gonna use a 5% vacancy. And so now we have our gross income, we have any additional income, and then we have a 5% vacancy loss. So that will be a negative number. And once you total that up, you're gonna have what's called effective gross income, or EGI. So that takes care of income. Basically, we can look at and we can say, hey, this is what we project for income. The next thing we wanna look at, obviously, is expenses. And expenses are another thing where people try to sort of fudge their way through it. And a lot of park owners, a lot of apartment owners will say, hey, I'm managing the park, so I don't have management. Or they may omit, landscaping because it's built into somebody's payroll. So we're gonna talk through some of the expenses that you really need to make sure you have, some that you can get away with depending on the size of the property, and then this will affect what's known as your net operating income. If you don't know what those terms are, go back, watch that video. I break down all the commercial real estate terms you need to know if you're just getting started. So the first expense we have is property taxes. Always gonna have property taxes. This will be dependent on which state you're in and which county, whether or not this goes up upon purchase. For example, in California, upon every new purchase, the property is reset based on the new sale price. So you'll wanna make sure you factor that into your underwriting. In Oregon, it's not the case, so you don't need to change that. Washington, just know wherever you are, it's something that you want to evaluate. And the best way to do that would be to call the county and just ask them, hey, how do you reassess taxes? Is it something upon sale? And then you'll get a good understanding whether or not you need to factor that into your new underwriting. We have property taxes. We also have insurance. Insurance is becoming increasingly difficult to get. I can tell you that most properties are having their insurance bills double, triple, and drastically increase. So always make sure you're getting a new to insurance quote. Make sure you're evaluating when the property taxes are gonna reassess. Those two are key. Next, you'll have utilities, right? And so in multifamily, typically we have public utilities. In parks, you may have private utilities, but you're always gonna have some utility expense, okay? Now you may have a rare case where you have a mobile home park where the utilities are billed directly to the tenants. And I mean water and sewer and electric. And that is a fantastic park. However, you still may have some common area streetlights. So I have not seen a property or come across a property that did not have any utility expense from the owner's side. Okay, so there's always going to be utility expense. This could include electric, water, sewer, could include natural gas, could include propane. You may throw, telephone under that, but they're always going to have utilities. After utilities, we're always going to have management. I don't care if the owner's managing or you have third party, there's going to be a management expense. Whether or not you are an owner who manages, you should still pay yourself for that time. And again, lenders are going to underwrite a management fee in regardless. And so what we want to remember when we're underwriting or evaluating properties, we've got to compare apples to apples. And the only way to do that is to have all of the consistent income and expenses in that every other property has. Again, if you're going to manage it yourself, great, pay yourself. It's still going to be a line item that you put into the equation. After that, next common is repair and maintenance. You're always going to have repair and maintenance. Things happen, leaks happen, you've got, issues with electrical, just all kinds of stuff will happen that you don't expect, so you're always going to have a repair and maintenance budget. Depending on the property you're evaluating, you're going to want to look and see what's kind of a market standard for that. We have differences between parks versus multifamily, but you're always going to have repair and maintenance. So make sure you understand what the historical repair and maintenance bills have been for the property. Best way to do that, go back and look at the last 3 years and see what are we really spending money on. And a lot of times you may find, plumbing issues that would lead to a leak. You could find issues that, they've been spending money on that probably could have been fixed and ultimately change the trajectory of where the R&M amount that they're spending. After repair and maintenance, you're going to have administrative costs. And now this can vary widely depending on the size of the property and what you have. A good rule of thumb for this, when I look at properties, is I take 1% of the effective gross income. So for example, if I have a $300,000 effective gross income annualized, I'm probably going to factor in about a $3,000 admin fee. Again, that's just a rule of thumb, sort of pretty broad stroke rule of thumb, but the reality is what's going to fall under this is like software fees, banking fees. You may put some office fees in here. You might have some bookkeeping, stuff like that. All that's going to probably be lumped into admin. And so that's an important thing to remember depending on the size of the property. Next, you're gonna have legal and professional fees. So this would be any attorney costs, right? If you have to evict someone, that's probably gonna go in here. Typically bookkeeping or accounting fees could be put into this. But there's always going to be some legal professional fees in this. Again, size of property is going to dictate whether or not how big of a chunk you use. After that, we have reserves, and this is another one, kind of like vacancy. All the lenders are going to underwrite with it, and now we know that reserves are just a sort of a fictitious number, but the reality is you should always have that in your underwriting. It's just a conservative sort of catch for having additional expense in your underwriting, and it's just a good thing to have. Typically in multifamily or parks, we would do about $50 to $75 per space or unit, kind of a good rule of thumb, but again, this is something you want to make sure you have for the lenders specifically. You could also have payroll. So as properties get bigger, they have payroll and a management fee. And so the bigger the property, typically you have on-site payroll that covers the salaries for the people working there, but you still have additional management fee, which covers all the off-site management or third-party management. So you really have two. In small properties, you can just get away with a management fee, but it's something to think about as you start to underwrite bigger deals. When we look at RV parks, we typically see a heavy payroll cost and an additional management fee. The reality is RV parks are super difficult to manage. Back up. They're not super difficult, they're just more laborious, right? You have more labor costs. So just be aware of that. Additional expenses could be security, could be landscaping, could be a number of different things, right? There's a lot of different expenses, especially when you underwrite an RV park. But once you get all those expenses, you're gonna total those up, and that will be your total expense load, right, for the property. And now for a mobile home park and a multifamily deal, typically we can see anywhere from like a 30% expense ratio. That means those expenses are 30% of what the gross income is. And typically you might see a 30 to 50% expense ratio depending on the property type and the location of the property and the size. But once we have that, we're gonna take the effective gross income, we're gonna subtract the total expenses, and we're gonna get NOI or net operating income. Once you have the net operating income, it's pretty simple from there. We're just gonna apply a cap rate. And so you'll wanna know in your market, what are cap rates typically selling for, or what properties are selling for? What is the sort of going cap rate, if you will? And that will lead you to the sales price. So NOI divided by cap rate, again, equals sales price. Again, go back and watch that video if you missed it, but that will give you a purchase price. And then what you can do is just adjust the cap rate based on your market or what you're willing to pay, and that will either increase or reduce the price. Okay. Then it's just a function of cash on cash. If you're just simply looking at how you want to evaluate the deal, and you say, hey, I have $1 million to place, and I'm looking for at least a 6 to 8% cash on cash return year one, well, then you just adjust the math, right? Because all what you need to know is you're gonna adjust the purchase price to reflect that cash on cash. That's also a function of debt. Okay, but we're getting super complicated. I want to keep it really simple for this video. Once you've got the NOI, then you just adjust cap rate to figure out what kind of price you're willing to pay. And again, go back and look at the market, look at sales comps, look at sale data. This will help you determine if it's a good deal, if it's priced, or if you need to lower the price in order to adjust that cap rate. In a future video, what we'll talk about is how debt affects that and how that affects your return. But for this video, hopefully that helps you identify what you should be looking for in a park. And if you don't see some of those, make sure you add those back in. The other factor besides cap rate you want to look at is price per space or price per unit. This is a really good metric to use. Again, looking at your sales data, you can say, hey, in this market for this particular product type, we see stuff's trading at 150 a unit, right? So that will help you determine based on your price, are we in line or are we too high, are we too low? And so what I would look at is cap rate and price per unit or price per space. And I would take both of those factors, and that would help me identify whether or not we've got a good deal. But underwriting all starts with having proper income and proper expenses, basically knowing what kind of NOI you have. And again, I can't tell you how many brokers like to change the NOI, or they like to make it look better than it really is. So this is important that you understand how to clearly identify and quickly analyze a park. Hopefully that's helpful. If you have questions, let me know in the comments, or you can reach out to me. And again, if you like this video, please hit the like button, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.